Ladies, does it sound like
we
have a
reverb to
reverb to
you?
you?
We have a
We have a
reverb.
reverb.
Okay, do we have two computers going?
I think we're good now.
Think we're good now. Okay, great. Let me start over again. Welcome to the Research Policy Impact Center's second day of Advocacy Week. Today is focus is housing equity, and we have a powerhouse of panelists. First of all, we have Dolores Bailey, who is the director, executive director of a nonprofit in Orange County called Empowerment. The Empowerment mission is to empower individuals and communities to determine their destiny through affordable housing, community organizing, and grassroots economic development. Ms. Bailey has been with the organization since 1996. She first began as a staff organizer. In 2002, she became the associate director in charge of development, rental properties, and marketing. And in May 2005, she became the executive director. She's worked diligently with the Northside neighborhood in Chapel Hill to create an overlay zone that addresses the concerns of gentrification. That neighborhood is a traditional low impact neighborhood. And so she has been working diligently in that area since 1996. Also, her organization is working to do training sessions for rental units. And they also have a new set of units that will house 10 families. And that is called the Peach Apartments. So she has started at the bottom and made her way to the top and is still working hard for the folks in the Chapel Hill Carrboro area. Ms. Bailey, will you give us a wave?
I will. Good morning.
Good morning. Then we also have Unica Smalls. She is the Assistant Director of Housing and Neighborhood Development for the City of Greensboro. Her educational background and professional experience have proven to be very useful. She is so versatile when it comes to performing at an elevated level. She prides herself on being able to generate and use financial information in a timely, result-oriented procedures. And she's worked with professional partners to focus on process improvement, promoting positive outcomes, and abilities to transfer into performing human resources in an exceptional manner. She takes pride in new initiatives and supporting the city of Greensboro in reaching its goals by focusing on the intricacies of neighborhood development and housing equity. Ms. Smalls, give us a wave this morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And our panelist moderator is Leah Henry. Leah is the president of Two Rivers Development Partners, which is an economic development and real estate development firm that provides consulting and project management on the convergence of ideas and opportunities. Leah's areas of expertise include affordable housing development, rural development, disaster recovery, and workforce development. She has worked with some of North Carolina's most successful and sector-leading nonprofits, as well as local, regional, and state government entities. As a volunteer, she serves as the commissioner for the Rocky Mount Housing Authority. Currently, she is the director of housing and equity initiatives for the RPIC. Good morning, Leah.
Good morning.
So we are going to let Leah take over from here. This is her wheelhouse. We are so excited to have these ladies who are making a difference for families and communities throughout North Carolina. So Leah, take it away.
Thank you, Rosalind. Good morning, ladies. Excited to have this conversation, particularly because these ladies have a wealth of knowledge across a wide variety of areas. So we're going to have to be disciplined and trying to stick to our topic. So what we're going to talk about this morning is the complexities and some of their success and challenges in providing affordable housing and workforce housing in a context of growing communities that have universities and therefore students. And so we've got housing shortage across the board at every income level, just about in North Carolina. and we've got challenges in every community, but having a plethora of students and staff and faculty from large universities and colleges adds a particular set of challenges, and we wanted to hear from folks who are dealing with them daily, both from the practitioner standpoint and from the policy standpoint. Interestingly enough, when I was doing background research, there's not as much academic research and data on this particular issue as one might think. What I did find, there were some commonalities that folks found. Absolutely, having the presence of students does increase housing prices and rental prices. Even in smaller communities where the base population is stagnating or diminishing, they were still able to find that there's a positive, meaning the numbers go up, not necessarily positive, but there's an increase in rental costs and in housing prices for sale. They found that there's often a friction between the populations. So the student populations and the long-term resident populations are often different in age, in income, maybe racially or ethnically. And so a lot of times that causes some discord between those two populations in a community. They found that in a lot of these communities, investors are outbidding potential owner occupants for single family houses. And investors who are doing rental housing are either building specifically to the student market, or they're taking family housing offline and turning that also into student rentals. So those are some of the issues that I found across the board. And what this all leads to is that there can be a conflict in our policy goals, because communities want growth, but we also want to preserve existing communities. And so we've got two ladies here who are going to talk to us a little bit about their experiences with some of these issues. So Dolores, can we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about Empowerment's current history and your current work?
Sure. And let me thank you for letting me be here. This is a very important topic for Empowerment, particularly because we're a nonprofit that's located less than a mile away from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So we are largely affected by what's going on. But let me just change a little bit, Rosalind, about the narrative that you read for me. Empowerment was created in 1996. I didn't come to Empowerment until 2002 and then became the executive director in 2005. The importance of that is in 1996, the African-American community of Northside, which again is within walking distance from the University of North Carolina, and also the African-American community of Pine Knolls were both starting to be falling into disrepair. There was all kinds of things going on, bad elements, and the investors had started to realize the gold mine that were these two neighborhoods. And so early gentrification was happening slowly in the Northside and Pine Knolls communities. So when I started at Empowerment in 2002, these two African-American communities were probably 85% owner occupied. And when I say owner occupied, most of those were Black owners. We sit today in less than 10% owner occupied. And that shift has been due to students. And that shift has been due to investors recognizing, number one, the very first investors I think I can talk about for the Northside community started at a very slow rate, doing exactly what you said, Leah, buying up properties, converting those homes that used to be homes into student rentals. It happened very slowly, and it has grown exponentially. It's almost out of control. But one of the things that Empowerment did was create a program that worked with the students. So as the students started to move into the community, we created something called the Northside Initiative, which extended open arms to the students, hoping to develop a good relationship as the community shifted from owner-occupied to students. So your question was, I think, Leah, how has Empowerment been affected? Let me just say that we have been through almost every stage of gentrification and watching this neighborhood, which is so close to the University of North Carolina, change very little good ways and a lot of ways that could discourage the culture of this neighborhood. So I'll leave it there and share later.
Thank you. So now, Unica, can you tell us a little bit from your perspective, working with the city of Greensboro, where you've got two large powerhouse UNC campuses, in addition to some private colleges?
Sure.
What is your experience? What is your work, and how does that intersect with this issue of students in the community?
So working in the housing and neighborhood development, as most community development departments, we get a certain set of entitlement funding as well as partnership throughout the city of Greensboro. And certainly it goes without saying that our partnership with our local colleges and universities is crucial. So in doing that work, we have to make sure that the lines of communication are open, that channels for discussion are positive, and that we're working strategically to align both our university needs with our local community. And once that strategic alignment is made, we work in coordination with, for example, at the UNCG, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, happens to house currently the study for housing. And so under the initial leadership of Dr. Stephen Seals, many studies were done in the city of Greensboro and Gifford County areas that highlighted many of the disparities that currently occur within the housing and real estate development areas within the city of Greensboro and Gifford County. We also are currently partnering with Winston-Salem State University on a study for economic mobility, which encompasses housing and neighborhood developments for local, what we call permanent residents, as well as many times the student residents are transitioning in and out of the local community. And so in doing those partnerships, what we aim to do is take the theory and practice and research data from our local university, couple that with being a practitioner such as myself, and use that data and information to work in a more effective and efficient manner and address issues from both sides, from a student standpoint, as well as our permanent residents.
So that brings me back to Dolores. What kind of partnerships has Empowerment been able to develop with the university in terms of community development?
I am so jealous of Unica and her partnerships that they've been able to develop. Let me say, and remember, this has been 25 plus years of things that have been happening. So Empowerment was started by two MSW students from UNC, so that was a little bit of a partnership. Empowerment worked with the town of Chapel Hill to create something called the Northside Neighborhood Conservation District, which was an overlay district that prevented investors from building out of control kinds of buildings for students. The university, unfortunately, I think for the first few years just sat back and allowed developers to encroach upon our African-American neighborhoods. They didn't become a part, I think, of the actual partnership in this, if you could call it a partnership, and nothing like what Unica describes. It is more, it knows its students are in this community. It appreciates what the nonprofits in these communities have done to welcome the students. But as far as actually having a partnership around housing for the community, there is an initiative that started, and I'm going to get my dates wrong, but probably around 2017, 2018, with another nonprofit called the Jackson Center, where the university gave money through self-help to the Jackson Center, and they started buying properties around in the neighborhood that would go to people that, so people could buy homes, and mostly minorities that could buy homes. But as far as, and the university gets the opportunity to use the neighborhood / partnership in that they study us all year long. They send students over to us every year. They want internships, all of those things. But as far as actual put your feet in the ground kind of, we are going to help around housing. That's not happening in Empowerment's opinion. Matter of fact, we are building an apartment, Rosalind mentioned at the beginning, we're building an apartment complex in the Pine Knolls community, 10 units for 30% and below AMI. It was sparked by the fact that a university employee could not afford to live in Chapel Hill. I would want for Chapel Hill to care about at least their employees and where they lived, and that they live close enough and that they could afford living close to the university. That would be an excellent partnership. But that's not what's happening. The university is taking care of its own, but in my opinion, and as far as empowerment, true partnership between this organization around housing is not happening the way it should.
And so I would ask you, as a follow-on, and then Unica to weigh in on this. Do you think part of that is because it is a public state university? Is there
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. And I think, we were talking about policy. The town of Chapel Hill has something to do with this also. And Unica again mentioned the HUD grants and CDBG grants. The university has a piece of this, as does the town of Chapel Hill. As a public entity, the university does not have to do any of this stuff with this neighborhood. They could allow developers and investors just to go unchecked in our neighborhoods. Our voices, our united voices, make them realize that. The other side of that, Leah, is then we have to get in front of the town of Chapel Hill, in front of Orange County. We have to say, do something about this. That's how we ended up creating the conservation district. We went to the council. We asked for some type of relief for how the investors and developers were building units for students. The university, of course, can be, very, yes, we agree it's a problem, but they are not aggressive enough. It's not number one. As long as it's being taken care of, they kind of step back, but policies have to change to make these things happen. And it may be too late.
So it's never too late. I've been called an hopeless optimist. And so in working with city leaders and vested stakeholders, for example, East Greensboro Now is a not-for-profit that is set up for community development. And that particular organization is located in the East Side, which is where North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University is located. So that's a natural partnership that makes itself available, not only for looking at housing issues, but looking at issues of security, educational enhancement, and resources that are available. And oftentimes, if that dialogue and partnership and intentional efforts, not saying it's always easy, because as in any organization or in partnership, everybody has different priorities per se. But in looking to build a coalition, oftentimes there is significant overlap in those initiatives. So you identify those overlaps, you try to get vested partners involved, and then put in a strategic roadmap, so to say, to how can we effectively address these issues. Just like anywhere in North Carolina, housing is in a crisis mode. And we do have a significant number of investors coming in and making major significant acquisitions in, let's just say, underrepresented communities. And so what you have to do is approach that from informing the community. For example, the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department makes a concerted effort in engaging our neighborhood associations, which works in coordination with this particular organization, East Greensboro Now. As a matter of fact, that organization is partnering with North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University to do a study around sociology, to look at impacts in neighborhood association, and specifically with regard to how investors are coming in and making significant acquisitions, in my opinion, and almost to the point where there's a level of price setting where lease and rental availability is happening with some of those investors. So I encourage you, Ms. Dolores, to stay encouraged and to try to reach out and develop some partnerships. And if, you know, after this meeting, if I can be of any assistance in that effort, please, by all means, let me know.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I do want to make one other point. Chapel Hill is a very small area. And the problem that happened 20 years ago was the fact that there is an ETJ, there's an area that they can only expand to. And so what we're fighting for and have been fighting for years is we've got the partnerships in place, but the land is so valuable that the person who brings the most dollars to the table, no matter how they smile at you, no matter how we partner together, the fact is the land is almost used up. And so the question between the have and have nots really becomes who's got the most money to put down what kinds of projects. We've got all kinds of nonprofits. We've got Habitat for Humanity. We've got Community Trust. We have other nonprofits and we all work together. But the reality is the space is small and the battle is on with who can move fastest. Even for homeowners in our traditionally African-American neighborhoods, certainly if an investor comes to that person and says, I will offer you $300,000 for your home, when they're already struggling with their taxes. Anyway, that's another issue that we deal with in this small group in Chapel Hill for the neighborhoods that we're working in. The taxes are higher in these African-American neighborhoods. We just discovered that the property taxes are higher because the developers come in and build a unit for student housing, which looks like a house and is classified as a single family home. So when the appraising is done of the neighborhood, you're appraising a house that was built that has maybe 8 bedrooms in it to a house that's smaller with 3 bedrooms that's been around since 1942, and the two places are paying the same kinds of taxes. So when an investor comes to a Black business home, a Black homeowner, and offers them some price for their home, they'll take that money, being desperate for that money, but not necessarily being able to find another place that they can spend or buy a home at $300,000. So it's kind of a rippling effect. We see all of this. We see relationships, and we have developed relationships with not only nonprofits around housing, but also the community centers. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things that Empowerment did when I came aboard in 2002. We strengthened our neighborhood association that worked with the police department, that worked with town hall. It is a fight that I won't give up, but at this point, we are probably 20 years already, maybe past Greensboro. Greensboro has people who are willing to work with. You've got A&T, we got UNC. Central further down the road. It's no lack of being able to work towards, it's no lack of goodwill. The reality that's happening is we've got some land, it's limited, it's expensive. We're near the university. Developers have figured out a way to buy up the properties and convert them to student housing, and not as much converting to rental units for employees of the university or employees of the hospital, which is what our main concern is. Not necessarily about the students, but it is about the people who work at those institutions and them having housing in the town that they work in. So that's really more our issue than just the fight. It's about what decisions are being made on who's going to get this housing that's being created.
Dolores, you brought up an interesting point, which is that it's not just about student housing, it's also about housing for employees.
Yes.
And a lot of times folks, when they think about employees at universities, they're not thinking about the vast majority of people who are low to moderate income, who keep these institutions running, right? From the cafeteria workers and janitors to secretaries and things of that nature. And oftentimes the hospital has to be the hook, right? Because that's the unit that the university is really concerned. They want doctors and nurses close.
Right, right.
If the other people have to commute, that's not such a concern for them, but they want those medical people up close. So I'd be interested, I'm not aware of, but I'd be interested to know if UNC Chapel Hill has done anything proactively to provide housing for employees, or if that's something that you've had conversations about.
So they have just done a study, as a matter of fact, Leah, and it has not been produced yet, of how they will accommodate those workers. So they're looking at their associate professors, they're looking at their doctors, they're looking at the nurses. Yes, you're absolutely right. They want them close by, and certainly to get the top students the top graduate students that they need to come to the university, then there has to be housing for them. They're working on it, but this is 2023. Let's say they started the study in 2021. We are that far into trying to deal with how we house your employees, and you are now doing a study of how you house your employees. The problem is the resources are slowly being eaten up. So the places that are even possible to put their employees is going out the window. For instance, there's a major project the University of North Carolina has just done off of 15501. It's called Easttown. Lots of land. They had the opportunity to create housing for their employees, but they opted not to. So they make decisions about who they're going to house and how they're going to house it. That's the hospital, yep. And then the university. It's a balancing act, I will say.
So Unica, we talked about students. What are the conversations in Greensboro around the employees at UNC Greensboro and North Carolina A&T?
So I'll broaden that to incorporate economic development as a whole in housing and making sure that safe, affordable housing is available, not just for university staff and administration, but the workforce in general. So, for example, when you look at economic development, many of the companies and or major employers look at issues such as transit and housing as they make selections. And the city of Greensboro is fortunate in that we've been able to get some significant wins in the community. Toyota, for example, is relocating one of this major facilities here in Greensboro. So in that same effort, although we do have a few years before that facility will be up and running, so it's a combined effort. One, from our Guilford Works program, so we're making sure putting structures in place to make sure that the skilled labor workforce is also available to fill some of these jobs. And that's at city council mandate that we want to be able to fill some of these opportunities with local residents to take full advantage of the opportunity. But also in that same vein, we have workforce initiatives that are put in available. So one of our major focuses under the leadership of the city manager is to be able to live, work, and play in your same neighborhood, and focusing on that, having a walkable community as well. So many of these initiatives will take a tremendous amount of work and collaboration and effort from all of our stakeholders, but I can certainly say that all of these efforts and initiatives are being promoted. We're seeking engagement from our communities, from every aspect as it relates to economic development, in hopes that when we put these structures in place, that there will be positive results. And we can definitely see somewhat of a proactive approach, looking at data and statistics and what's available and utilizing that data to say, well, here's an opportunity, for example, in East Greensboro to have an impact. But how do we bring those residents to the table to make sure, one, that they can take advantage of, if it's a job opportunity, training opportunity, initiatives, that information is disseminated in a timely and effective manner. But also when you look at housing, we're looking at opportunities to stand up housing, whether it be annexing a certain part that may not currently be within the city limits, but putting it all on the table and always keeping a win-win as the result of whatever initiatives and program and projects that we stand up in the city of Greensboro.
So you
Lee-
did mention, okay, go ahead.
Leah, can I just mention something, something Unica said about the partnerships and neighbors working together? I'll give you a current situation of what just happened. There's been no problem expanding into the African-American neighborhoods around the university. But just a month ago, the town council brought forth a proposal to do a rezoning in Chapel Hill, in certain areas of Chapel Hill, the richer neighborhoods of Chapel Hill, the larger spots of Chapel Hill, which would allow building on those acre lots that could possibly accommodate duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes for the middle income workforce. The residents of Chapel Hill in those neighborhoods had an absolute fit. They turned out in groves to oppose any type of rezoning of their properties, which might cause for more housing for middle income, not affordable housing, even for middle income. So what I bring to you, and you talk about equity, because most of those owners are white owners. When you talk about equity, we were not able to bring our voices loud enough to stop the gentrification from happening in the African-American neighborhoods. However, when the housing piece was brought to the other side of Chapel Hill, where the owners have larger properties, have larger property values, they shot that down. They shot the efforts of the town council to create more housing for everybody, absolutely shot down completely in a week, in 2 or 3 months. That proposal is now off the table. So we are living with a segregated Chapel Hill, even in what we want as far as housing. Not talking about affordable housing, we're just talking about middle income housing. That cannot even, will not, is not going to happen right now in Chapel Hill. So we've got a lot of different attitudes, a lot of different, almost we're like split personalities in this town. We want affordable in the place where they want it, in the African-American neighborhoods, but we don't want it in the other parts of the neighborhood. So I look for opportunities to sit down with those residents, those homeowners, and find out, like, how can you, like Unica mentioned, how will you work with us?
Right.
How can we have a win-win, like Unica mentioned? But right now, they just have that fear tactic that happens to them. And if you want to talk about equity, there is none as far as that goes in this housing market in Chapel Hill. Not yet.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because so this is a whole other topic, right? That we can talk about, these issues about zoning and rezoning and upzoning and the equity issues around that. And I don't know what the final result has been, but you all might be aware that even in Raleigh, in a $1 million plus neighborhood, where someone proposed to take down one big house and put up $1 million townhouses, the community was still absolutely opposed. And it was a handful, 17, I think, townhouses, and they absolutely were opposed. They didn't want traffic and crime. I'm not sure how you get crime from $1 million townhouses, but those are the things that they said. So this is an issue that we're going to face in all these communities. And like you said, Chapel Hill is so landlocked. And one thing I think that's unique for you in Chapel Hill is that, as someone who lived in Durham for 20 years, my sense was always that the leadership in Chapel Hill didn't have to really worry about the lack of affordable housing, because Carrboro and other parts of Orange and Chatham County and Durham were kind of a safety valve for them, right? So folks just lived in these other places and then came in the morning to go to school or work, and then left out in the evening.
Yes.
But the success in the economic development recruitment that all of these counties has been doing means that there's no longer a safety valve
Exactly.
in those places.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
And I'll just add in, by no means is the city of Greensboro, I don't want to give the wrong impression that we got it all figured out, because we don't. But we're working very diligently and intensely on figuring out, and we're making progress. So in that progress, there's lots of lessons learned in that process of looking at challenges and how you overcome them. But I can say the culture and the atmosphere, one is of cooperation. So, but I don't want it to be misconstrued that the city of Greensboro's got it all figured out, because we don't. But we're intent and we're intentional about solution finding.
So I want to pivot a little bit and ask, we've talked about some of the issues and the challenges. And I'll start with Dolores. What do you need? Something, we have not because we ask not. So what do you need to have greater impact and to be able to do more equitable housing development in Chapel Hill?
I am going to say it's more representation on the councils and the advisory boards. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of weight with a transportation council that is for affordable housing. We actually have an advisory board, affordable housing advisory board. We need more people on those boards, on the advisory boards, and we need more people of color on the town councils. We need people of color on the school boards. We need our voice to be represented. Chapel Hill now is about 8% African American, which means it's very hard if we don't have some representation, people that look like us speaking on our behalf, who've actually experienced any of the things we're going through right now. It's very difficult to get policies changed. I'll give you, for instance, Empowerment 4 years ago worked with a mobile home community that was about to be overtaken by a developer coming out of Texas. The developers were going to come in and completely wipe out the mobile homes. There were probably about 40 mobile homes in that park. The problem was the town, and so what we did was help them use their voices, figure out how to advocate for themselves. They went down to the town council and told the town council, we're a neighborhood. We're not a trailer park. We deserve to be here. We've lived here for years. We're a community. The problem, Leah, was the people on the town council were not considering this trailer park as a community. So when you don't know what you don't know, you don't know it. The council was making a decision based on a trailer park, and most everybody's stereotypical idea of a trailer park are people sitting out on the grass, smoking, whatever. It's all negative. But what this community was able to do was go down to town council and make them understand they were a neighborhood. When you have to first tell those people who represent you who you are and that you are a viable citizen of your city, that's a problem. And I offer to you that there are lots of pockets like that in Chapel Hill where the people who sit on the council don't know, don't understand. They win on the campaign of we're going to fix affordable housing, but do they get up from that seat and walk around in these communities? It doesn't happen a lot. So my answer is more representation, more minority representation on the town council, on boards that the university has control over. I think that would be major.
I would echo the sentiments of Ms. Bailey. One of the partnerships that the Housing and Neighborhood Development currently has is with Cone Philanthropy, and I work directly with the manager of diversity and inclusion, Mr. Miller Pender, who is instrumental in supporting and conducting research and training around the efforts of strategic planning, specifically within neighborhood associations. So in doing that work in the training initiative and engagement initiative that she has been and highly responsible for with regard to strategic planning, developing missions, goals, and objectives, she has been able to introduce this concept of developing a plan for each community, which could and often does include advocacy. So empowering is kind of a good segue into the work that's being done at the Institute around the efforts of advocacy. And so when you, the training, the support, the structures are done, and you can, because a lot of these communities, the perception is that people are not, they don't care, which is truly a
Yeah.
myth that needs to be dispelled. Now, what I can say holds some credence is that perhaps they don't know how. And so when you fill in that gap between the passion and the initiative and the want and desire to stand up for your community with the how. So the strategic training and initiative, it gives those segments of society the how. How do you do it? How do you go before city council and advocate for yourself? How do you go to vested partners and say, you know what, we'd love to have you, and these are the areas that we need help around. So again, training, inclusion, tools, resources made available to those communities who may not always know the how is very important.
I
So
agree.
in that sense, Dolores, is empowerment currently actively doing community advocacy training or engagement?
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about what you do with that?
So we have started and continue to have a monthly meeting of the Neighborhood Association. We're a part of a group called Justice United, which targets different social issues that affect communities that we're related to. Economically, we just started an initiative called Bright Path Solutions, which helps minority businesses make sure their foundation is there. The foundation of their building is solid. They are registered with the state. They're doing their taxes properly. We saw this when COVID happened and many minority businesses could not apply for the PPP funding because their foundation was not correct. We work with, as I mentioned before, probably one of the only nonprofits that works in the mobile home communities, helping to create leadership and advocacy for themselves. And we work with another nonprofit called Family Success Alliance, which works with families that are at or below poverty. We are teaching, we are sharing, even in our housing department. Part of what we do before we rent or, can you hear me, Leah? Because you look frozen. Can you hear me, Rosalind? Okay.
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we do before we rent apartments to anyone is to counsel them. So part of being a HUD certified housing counseling agency. And so we have an opportunity to sit down with residents one-on-one, whether they're renting from us or not, and help counsel them through, this might be too expensive for you. This might not be what you need. You don't need to live in this neighborhood. So we are constantly working with residents of all of Orange County, not just Chapel Hill at this time, and creating advocates and creating leaders in communities.
Thank you. I lost you all for a minute. I'm sorry about that, but internet access in rural North Carolina is a real live issue. And so I had kept my fingers crossed. I realized that, thank you for that, but I did get most of it about all the things that you are doing that I had no idea about. So Unica, you did not have a chance to answer the question, what is it that you need? What other resources do you need to further address the issue of maintaining the integrity of your communities that surround your campuses?
So when I think about resources, I also think about tools. So what's in your toolbox? What resources, what tools, what do you need? And of course, there's always a need. A lot of people want to default to capital. Okay, so yes, funds are needed, but you also need people. And who those people are extremely important. What skill set those people are, what engagement, and to be quite transparent, what vested, those people that you bring to the table should be vested in the outcomes for whatever community you are working with. And when you think about the underrepresented, sometimes the ignored, or as Ms. Bailey indicated, communities that are not accustomed perhaps of advocating or standing up to power structures, so to say. So bringing people that have that will to engage, that are vested from a skill set, from a financial standpoint, those are crucial. So that's what we need. We need more of those people. We need more resources. We need more data, so that we are empowered to make informed decisions based upon data, and all those things can work together to have positive impacts in your community. The work is, and you need courage. So let me not forget about courage. So when you are working in an environment sometimes where, let's just say, for lack of a better word, you haven't always felt respected or valued, the courage to speak out, to say, you know what, let's just challenge this perception. It's not a comfortable role to play a lot of times, but it can be done. And the more that you do it, the more proficient one becomes at it. So I'm going to add courage as a characteristic trait for those people that come to the table and that are willing to sacrifice a lot of times all their gifts, talents, and skill sets. So that courage is very useful at times.
I would agree with Ms. Smalls. This work is not for the faint of heart. You really have to, it is about passion. It really is. And so having these adverse things come up against you, having some good things happen, but ultimately, for me, it is about the community and the community as a whole and the success. And I love what Ms. Small said when she said a win-win. I look for that. I seek that. In 20 years of work at this particular organization in this county, it can be found in different places. And I believe it can, but it does take courage. It's not for the faint of heart. There is not a lot of money in it for any of us leaders, but it's never about the money if the win-wins happen, when the win-wins happen.
So both of you talked about courage and some of the power dynamics in the community and the institutions. Each of you recently participated in the Institute's Equity and Advocacy Certificate Program. Were there any things that you learned or experienced in that program, or the conversations you might have had with your colleagues that have impacted how you're looking at your work?
So I'll go first. One of the action items, so we walked away from the equity advocacy training with, was to contact our local politicians and to engage on a legislative standpoint. And so I did just that. Me working for the city, I had to also partner with Latoya Caesar Crawford, who is our intergovernmental manager here at the city. It's a new role that we brought on board with the city of Greensboro. So I partnered with her. I developed my action items, developed my list of asks. Of course, me being an educational advocate and a literacy advocate and a housing advocate, my asks were all centered around those types of opportunities. I was able to reach out and successfully get a meeting with Representative Amos Quick, and he engaged us. He actually, and Ms. Bailey, you can appreciate this question that came from him, was his, after I, of course, touted the initiatives that I wanted to support with him, he engaged me further on a dialogue about investors, and if there was a limit put on the number of acquisition that perhaps investors could engage in. And I told him, yeah, I said, I didn't know what the number was, but the number should be tied to whether that investor had the ability to monopolize and set prices in a set environment. So that started a engagement, a partnership, not just with some of our local leaders, but him in the legislature. We've had other conversations around other issues such as fair housing. And I have to credit that I probably would have never done that had it not been for the training, advocacy training that I acquired at the Institute.
And I will say, from my many years at this, the thing that I came away with was we really need to coalesce around each other and the work that we're all doing, because to prevent the silo effect. Again, Ms. Smalls talked about the courage. I think we'd be stronger together. I'm so glad for the workshop, for the conference, because it let me hear the stories of other workers in this same arena. And just that we're not out there by ourselves, but we'd be so much stronger if we had opportunity to meet more often, if we had opportunity to share what Ms. Smalls knows and what Ms. Bailey knows and what Ms. Bess Gaddy knows. We need each other. If there was some place we could create and touch, then we'd be stronger, I think. When I was there, that was exactly what I was like, oh, I know what she's talking about. I've been through that. Maybe I can help her with this. Or, oh, does it have to be that way? It's needed. And that's what that conference did for me. The most important thing was like, I'm not out here by myself. And there are others out here who are experiencing things that I've already been through, happy to share what I've been through. So it was impactful for me. And I wish there was some way we could keep it going.
I think that's really great feedback. And I do think one of our goals at the Research Policy and Impact Center is to be able to kind of be a meeting place for a lot of these ideas and information, because certainly I can probably think off the top of my head of a dozen dynamic housing practitioners, either at nonprofits or in local governments, who are having very similar experiences with the pressures on housing development in their communities and managing growth and responding to growth. And it's one thing for you to be having that conversation alone. It's another thing if folks who represent some millions of people in this state can all come together and say, we have the same issues, and we collectively have devised some of the solutions.
Yes,
Right.
Exactly.
And so before I ask my closing question,
I am sure that is a wonderful question she's going to ask.
So am I.
Sure.
When we get it, we're gonna be ready to answer it too.
So we'll be ready whenever she comes back. As she said, this internet is always touch and go.
Yeah, which is one thing about flexibility, is that one thing that came through engaging with people is some of the locality barriers. So now we have
Yes.
Zoom, we have YouTube, we have other options to engage
Have I
and invite
lost you
people to
again?
the table.
You did lose us, Leah.
Yes, Leah.
So we missed
Carry
all of we share one more time with us what you wanted us to know or wanted to ask.
I do apologize. Believe it or not, when I'm not speaking, this never happens. Oh dear. So what I was saying is, I had a certain set of questions and my own thoughts about how the conversation would go. But are there some particular points, positive or negative challenges around pursuing affordable and workforce housing in a university community that you would like to highlight that I didn't mention?
Ms. Smalls?
I would just say that housing is one of many issues that are reflected in poverty statistics. So you have housing, literacy, educational training. You also have a dynamic of advocacy included in the intersection of being able to look at and build opportunities for economic mobility. And now what I found is that they're so interconnected. So educational institutes are, for many people, the first platform to the ability to increase income and have lifelong changes in not only their personal lives, but their community lives. And so when you look at all of the dynamics that go into how people are in poverty and how they can elevate out of poverty, you can look at many of the such as health. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention health issues and those implications as well. And so many opportunities and challenges and barriers in the whole gamut exist around the dynamics of health, literacy, education, housing. And so the more you can bring those issues together, you can address issues that are at the core causes of poverty. And so I invite and I encourage dialogue, and I thank you for the opportunity. So that would be the only thing that I would add to this, is to understand the intersection between all those dynamics.
I think that is a great word, intersection. I am a big movie buff, and two movies that are in my head right now are Avatar and The Woman King. In The Woman King, we saw women of power. We saw women against all odds fighting for what they believed in and just the integrity of women. And in Avatar, there was a phrase, "I see you." And part of our problem as minorities, as African Americans in this workforce, just like Ms. Small said, whether it's economics, whether it's education, whether it's transportation, whether it's food, whether it's housing, is that sometimes we're not seen. And what we have to do is find that woman king inside of each of us, grow it, address the issues, but share it. In The Woman King, they groomed other women to be warriors. What we can't forget is the generations behind us who need what we've got, who need the passion that we have. So I would say, let's see the generation behind us, make sure they see us, and then be those strong men and women of color that can make a change for our neighborhoods.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do appreciate that, particularly because one of the things I did want to make sure we highlighted is that there are so many great things about being in a university or a college town.
Yes.
The excitement, the energy, the intellectual curiosity. Appreciate you saying that we've got to make sure that we reach back and interact with them and encourage and mentor them, and make sure that when we step off of the stage, that there's still plenty of people there left to continue the work. And I want to highlight that at UNC Greensboro, at A&T, and at UNC Chapel Hill, there are centers for housing and real estate development, and there seem to be active student groups now really focused on real estate development as a field. And so we've got to figure out a way to get them excited about particularly affordable housing and community development, and get them engaged in what we're working on so that we can have that smooth transition. Rosalind, is there anything else that we need to do before we wrap up?
No, I think with Miss Bailey's final comment about the Woman King and growing women was a wonderful way to end the entire session. I will definitely take that visual with me for the rest of the day, and as well as the rest of Advocacy Week and on into the rest of the year, because many times, as she said, we need to look back and see those behind us and grow others. And I think that's part of what we've done today. So thank you all very much for all of your comments. I've worked in Chapel Hill, so I know exactly what you speak. And Unica, I'm in Greensboro quite a bit, so now I have another thought process about Greensboro. So thank you all so much for bringing the information forward.